Oh, all right, you guys, it's 10 o'clock. So I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Jim Brown. I'm a real estate attorney. I've been practicing for 20 years solo, and I've spent my whole life in real estate and real estate development and general contracting. It's the only thing I've ever done. And my co-host, Ryan.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for the intro. I'm Ryan Poole. I'm a real estate agent, been a real estate professional here in South Florida for over 20 years. Started a company called Real Trade, which is a tech platform. It's a social media platform and marketplace for real estate. So I tell everybody think Zillow mixed with LinkedIn, but only for real estate. And we have thousands of buyers and sellers on there now. We have about 1,000 agents and service providers like Jim that are adding lots of value to the agents that are on the platform. So we're excited here to connect and share value. You know, that's the big thing here is as Jim said, we all have a lot of expertise that we can share with each other, make the industry better and make our careers better.
Yeah, I mean, these meetings become so valuable, right? Because everybody has the same pain at one point or another. All the realtors are walking the same journey. And so if everybody says what's going on in their transactions, then I can go back and do some research, and then we can meet again and we can talk about the issues, and we can, you know, tease out what the laws are, and everybody becomes sharper. You know, the whole goal is that we all work less and make more, right? And if we all know that's the whole goal, right?
Amen. Amen to that one.
Work less, make more. And if we all know the rules, there's a lot less dialogue. The problem is when one realtor knows the rules and issues and the other realtor doesn't. And it's not so much I want to stress that you know what the rules are. The important part is you know what the issues are. So if you know there's an issue, you can always go to the contract. You can always find the answer. And the contract, although a lot of realtors are afraid of it, I want to say something that I mean with all my heart. The contract is your realtor's best friend. The more you know the contract, the better a realtor you can be, the less effort you're going to spend in the transaction. And today we're going to talk about 3 hacks that every realtor should know. And we're going to do 3 more in the future. And the reason I call them hacks, it's not so much that you're cheating, but it's going to be like you have an unfair advantage, right? So I'm going to give you some scenarios that come up in the lives of every realtor, every time you do deals, and you're going to have this issue in your mind, and you're going to know exactly where to go in the contract to solve it. And it's a hack in the sense that you're not going to spend all the effort you used to spend. And the things that we're going to talk about, you know, I don't want to insult anybody on the page for sure, but definitely this is stuff that the majority of agents don't know about. And if you don't know what we're talking about today, do not feel bad. You are not alone. But through this stuff, we're going to all raise each other's professionalism, and it's going to be a good situation. It's going to make a better situation for all of us for sure. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Ryan, before we get started?
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I mean, even if I've been going to say I've been to some of these meetings with Jim, and even having been in the industry, like I said, for over 20 years, I learned from Jim, you know, so much, and it's just going to be a great experience here because you know you got a real estate attorney right here at our disposal to help us and leverage that knowledge to help us, you know, close deals and be more efficient. So excited, Jim.
I am terrible at the chat, so if you can monitor the chat stuff, Ryan, that'd be awesome. If I miss something.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to say is at the end of the session, we're going to go over a couple of tools that can help you guys save time and money, and we're going to have a question and answer period. So I'm going to give you the 3 topics. We're going to talk about them briefly. My goal is to get you guys in and out quickly, and then at the end of the session, we'll have the question and answer stuff. Question and answer is valuable for me. This is the favorite part of my job, where I get to talk to you guys about what's going on in your lives, go back, do a little research, get back together as a group, share what I've learned, and sharpen each other's knives. But the goal is get you guys in and out quick. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about the 3 topics this time, and then next time we'll talk about 3 more. So the first one I want to talk about is, go ahead, Ryan, you can do the intro.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, we have these topics for the you know, for the contract. I mean, it's like you said, Jim, it's a tool that we all can use, and either whether you're a listing agent or a buyer's agent, there's definitely things that we can use to leverage the contract. So yeah, if you want to share your screen, Jim, with what you wanted to cover.
All right. So the first one we're going to talk about today is, can you see my screen, Ryan?
Yep. just started sharing. It's black right now.
Tell me when it comes through. Nothing yet?
Nothing yet. There we go. Boom.
There it is.
There's our favorite FAR bar contract.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Forms online. Log in. All right. The first one we're going to talk about is when does a seller have to pay a mandatory escrow? When does a seller in a transaction have to pay a mandatory escrow? You're in the middle of a walkthrough. The closing is in 2 hours. That big, beautiful entrance chandelier is missing, or there's a leak in the sink. Everybody's seen it. Everybody's been there. My question to you guys as a group is, when does that turn into a seller's, and how does that turn into an obligation for the seller to pay a mandatory escrow? Does anybody know the answer to that question?
The moment that he signed the contract.
Yeah, but there's a specific trigger in the contract.
The walkthrough.
Yep. Can you elaborate on that?
I believe they had to put like 150% in escrow if the repairs had to be done.
All right, Pablo, you are on it. So in the contract,
I have a great teacher.
So in the contract, there's a provision in the contract that a lot of people don't pay attention to. I think Pob's heard me talk about this before. So if you look at the contract, you can have you can do a walkthrough. The contract grants the buyer the right to do a walkthrough inspection. And a lot of agents argue over how many inspections they can actually conduct. But the reality is the contract says they can do multiple walkthroughs if necessary. So the contract grants the right for the inspection. You're walking through the inspection, you're doing the walkthrough inspection, and there's certain things that you're allowed to look at during the walkthrough inspection. So it says the inspection is there solely to confirm that all items of personal property are on the property and to verify that the seller has maintained the property in its as-is maintenance requirement, according to the as-is maintenance requirement, and has met all other contractual obligations. So while you hear sellers and buyers agents kind of argue all the time about the purpose of the walkthrough, the reality is a walkthrough can be maintained, can be conducted any number of times as long as the buyer's agent deems it necessary. And there's a whole host of things that can be conducted during the walkthrough. And there you hear a lot of agents argue between themselves about what and what isn't proper in the walkthrough. So everything can be looked at in the walkthrough, but here's where it kind of gets magical. So we had a transaction the other day, a couple months ago. It was a high-end townhouse in Jupiter. And on the day of the walkthrough, it was a three-story townhouse. The elevator didn't work. It's a several $1 million unit. And so on the day of the walkthrough, the elevator didn't work. The inspection report clearly said that the elevator had worked on days prior or at the time of the inspection. And so that's a change in the as-is maintenance requirement. But what I want you to see is, see where it says capital A, capital I, capital M, that's the as-is maintenance requirement. That's a defined term. When you see terms in the contract that are referred to with capital letters, those are called defined terms. So now it's up to you to go back in the contract and figure out where the as-is maintenance requirement is spelled out, is defined. So here you have the property maintenance section a little bit earlier. And if you read it, except for ordinary wear and tear and casualty and loss, seller shall maintain the property, including but not limited to lawn, shrubbery, and pool in the condition existing as of the effective date. And that's defined as the as-is maintenance requirement. So now you know what the as-is maintenance requirement is. And then they throw in this little sentence in here that's kind of, you're not really sure what to do with it. It just says, see paragraph 9A for escrow procedures, if applicable. So now we know that you can do anything on the walkthrough. And we know that the walkthrough, the seller is required to maintain the property that's as-is maintenance requirement. We know what the definition of that is. And I even talked to a realtor the other day who told me that anything can happen to the property because it's an as-is contract before the date of closing. And that just wasn't accurate. They've been doing real estate for a long time, longer than I've been doing it. So there's a lot of misconceptions in the contract. So now you go up here to that section 9A. So section 9A says, if you look down at the very bottom, can you guys see my cursor, Ryan?
Yep, see it perfect.
If prior to closing, seller is unable to meet the as-is maintenance requirement as required in paragraph 11 of it, in paragraph 11, which is what we read below, a sum equal to 125% of the estimated costs to meet the as-is requirement shall, not may, shall be escrowed at the closing. If actual costs to meet the as-is maintenance requirement exceed the amount, the seller will pay, and if it's less than the amount, the seller gets a refund. So what do we do right there? We just set out this hugely powerful term. And the reason why I say your contract is your best friend is because when you do the walkthrough and you have that seller that swapped out the lights for the cheaper lights, or you have the seller that grabbed the pool pump, which we had the other day, or you have that elevator that doesn't work on the day of closing, guess what? The property has to close on time, and the seller has to put in an escrow amount. So now it's not a matter of if they're going to escrow or not they're going to escrow. It's a matter of how much they're going to escrow. And so what that does is that takes a whole host of conversations off the table. So you have a seller that says, I'm not going to escrow, I'm not going to, that thing worked forever, or that was the original light, or that pool pump was never there, whatever it is. We can all go back to the inspection report and we can see that the pool pump was or wasn't there. But the point is, the contract is the agent's best friend, because when the contract was signed, the seller agreed to escrow that amount. So it's not a matter of if they are or if they're not, it's a matter of how much. And so with the elevator example I gave you, the elevator, the buyer, obviously, they want to have escrowed $1 million, and the seller doesn't want to escrow anything. And somewhere in the middle lies the answer. And so what you have to do is you have to go out and get a few estimates, and then you have to figure out what's reasonable. And in this situation, $50,000 was reasonable. There could have been some serious damage to the elevator. Thankfully, all that happened was there was a safety switch on the second floor that wasn't catching. And so all they had to do was replace the safety switch. They escrowed 50. It was $500 or something in a second. And the escrow was broken and all the money was returned to the seller except for the $500 for the repair. But here's the important thing. There was no discussion between the agents. One of the agents called me and they said, what do we do? The elevator's not working. And I said, you guys escrow some money. You just got to figure out how much. Boom. All the conversations about whose fault it was, if it was, if it wasn't. I said, you look at the inspection report, you confirm the elevator was working, you go out and you get a couple of estimates, and that's all you do. And of course, the big discussion was, in that transaction, what estimate was proper. And again, buyers want to escrow $1 million and sellers want to escrow $1. So you got to figure out what the right amount is. And in that transaction, I happen to be representing the seller. And I said to the seller, you know, this makes sense because elevators can cost a lot of money. They were kicking and screaming and they were insisting nothing was wrong. But again, the contract is there for you as an agent to use in favor of your other side, against your other side, against, if you're representing the seller, against the buyer. But it's also a tool for the agent to use with their party. And so if you know what the contract says, you know what provision to refer to. When you've got that seller that says, I don't have to escrow, all you do is you say, yeah, I'm sorry, it's in there. It's in the contract. Look at section 9, section sub A. All right. So that's an example of a transaction that can take a ton of time and effort for buyers and sellers, agents, everybody involved. But if you know the contract, if you know the hack, and I kind of hate to use the term, but if you know the hack, you can refer to it and get everybody sampled and move on. All right,
awesome,
next topic.
Jim.
Next topic we're going to talk about is you have a seller and the seller, there's a bunch of noise, I think, coming on your side, Ryan. You have a
Yeah,
seller and you have
mute your mics, guys, if you're on the call. That'll help. Yeah.
All right, that wasn't your side. And so you have a seller and you have a loan approval period. And so during the loan approval period, the loan approval period expires and the seller contacts the buyer and says, we're canceling the deal. I don't know if you guys have ever run into that transaction, but it's a real set of facts. And if you represent a buyer or you represent a seller and the seller gets a better offer, or you represent a buyer and you want to shore up your deal, you have to know how to avoid that mistake. And it's not so much a hack, but it's just an inside. It's a tool available in the contract. It's available to sellers who want to cancel deals, and it's available to buyers who want to shore up the deals so sellers can't cancel deals. So the way it works is this. Thanks, Ryan. During the financing period, buyers shall make application for financing. We all agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little provision at the end of that paragraph which says, loan approval which requires buyer to sell other real property shall not be considered loan approval unless Rider 5 is attached. We're going to come back to that in a minute. So in the normal course of things, during the loan approval period, buyer goes out, buyer gets a lender, buyer gets a loan approval letter, and then you communicate to the seller side that you got or didn't get the loan. You don't send the loan approval letter. You just communicate to the other side you did or didn't get the loan. And then what you do is, if you were approved, then you proceed to the closing. If you weren't approved, you get your money back. Sometimes the buyer's agents send over a copy of the loan approval letter. Sometimes those loan approval letters have provisions in them that say that the buyer has to sell other property. And if the loan approval letter says that the buyer has to sell other property, guess what? It shall not be considered a loan approval. So you want to send over a letter that says, if you're a buyer's agent, your client did or didn't get the loan, and that's a letter from your client. So it's an email that your client says, you say to your client, did you get the loan or you didn't get the loan? The client says yes, and that's the thing that you send over. A realtor is a conduit of information. They're not an original generator of information. A realtor is always the conduit. You're always asking your agent, you're always asking your client rather, what do you want to do? And their answer is what you convey to the other side. It's not your answer, it's their answer. So you got your loan approval and you send it over. Every once in a while, you'll get that loan approval that says the seller has to sell other property. And we had a loan approval that had a seller that had this very, very wealthy seller, and they had to sell other property. And then the loan approval period expired on Monday. And on Friday, the loan approval period expired on Friday. On Monday, the seller sent over a notice of cancellation. I don't know how many of you guys have run into this, but in the cancellation, it's in the contract, it says, if buyer fails to timely deliver any written notice provided in paragraph 8B sub 3 or 4 above to seller prior to the expiration of the loan approval period, then buyer shall proceed forward with this contract as though it had been checked as of the effective date. Provided, however, seller may elect to terminate the contract by delivering written notice of the termination to buyer within 3 days after the expiration of the loan approval period, and provided buyer is not in default. So what the contract says is, if you fail to give notice of the loan approval, the seller can cancel the contract. If the seller cancels the contract, the whole thing is done. So in this transaction, there's somebody coughing that if they could.
Patrick, Patricia, can you mute your mic? There.
Oh, I am. I'm sorry. Oh, let me get that.
No problem.
I'm joking too.
No problem. No problem.
Get a glass of water. Most important thing, you gotta mute your mic.
Let me mute.
All right. So if the buyer fails to give notice of loan approval, the seller can cancel. And that's exactly what the seller did here. But the buyer said, oh, we gave notice of the loan approval, but going back to this first paragraph, a loan approval which requires buyer to sell the real property shall not be considered a loan approval. So this is a tool for buyer side and seller side. It's something everybody needs to be aware of. And if everybody knows the rules, there are no surprises or gotchas. In this transaction, obviously the buyer was very upset. They had kids, you know, it's the typical, as bad as it gets, right? Kids starting school in a couple days, big expensive condo downtown, dad is starting a new job, mom had a new job. She was a lawyer downtown, and it was bad. And so the seller knew the terms of the contract. The seller's agent knew the terms of the contract, and they levered the buyer into another $35,000 to make the closing happen. So the buyer had to pay 35 grand to revive the contract, not revise it, but to revive the contract. And so they could close and get into their property. Not great, but if you know the tools, that can't happen to you. So a couple walking away rules. You never convey the loan approval document itself. You only convey a written statement that you did or didn't get approved from the buyer side. Mm-hmm. And the good buyer's agent looks at the loan approval and says whether and figures out what has to be done or doesn't, because there's another whole section about property related conditions of the loan, which we'll go into at another real trade title talk meeting. But you never want to send over the actual loan approval letter. You want to send over a statement from your client that says they did or didn't get the loan a couple of days before the loan approval period. You want to reach out and ask them whether they did or they didn't and how they want to proceed. And that's what all you want to convey. All right, anybody have any, well, we'll talk about any questions we have at the end. And how can a buyer, so number 3 is today, how can a buyer kill a condominium sale at the last minute? And I will tell you this, 90% of all agents make this mistake. If this is foreign to you, you are not alone. So how can a buyer kill a deal at the last minute? And in a falling price environment like we're in, you want to do everything you can do as a buyer's agent, as a seller's agent to get to the closing table. Rule number 1, take big deposits. Big deposits make people perform. Rule number 2, make sure you met all your contract deadlines, including loan approvals and everything else. And the one we're going to talk about today is one I see all the time. So if you're buying or selling a condominium, there's a provision in the condominium rider that says, in the non-developer's disclosure. So this is just the standard form condominium rider. And you work down to the bottom of the condominium rider. And here is where everybody runs afoul. In the provision that requires the seller deliver certain items to the buyer, and we're not even going to get into the nuances of what when it has to be delivered and when it doesn't have to be delivered. This is the thing I want to point out today. There are 5 things that the seller is supposed to give to the buyer to keep the buyer in the deal. And almost no agents deliver all 5. And here are the 5. They're spelled out right here. You have to deliver the declaration of condominium. Can you see my cursor, Ryan?
Yes, I can see it.
I wish I had a way to put this in color. The first one is you have to deliver the declaration of condominium. The second one is you have to deliver the articles of incorporation of the association. Everybody gets those. Most people get the bylaws and the rules of the association. This is the bylaws and rules of the association. That's 2 different things. And then a copy of the most recent year-end financials. And then here's the one, and a lot of agents get that. Here's the one everybody misses. And frequently asked questions and answers document, number 5. So you have to deliver all 5 of those things. If you don't deliver all 5 of those things, and nobody takes the time to check these boxes, but that's a whole nother discussion. You just want to make sure you got all 5 of those things to your client. And if you didn't, you make sure you get them in there. And the client, the buyer, has the right to cancel the contract if they did not receive all 5. And we had one of these the other day, a very expensive condominium. And the seller agent had been doing this for a million years. The seller's agent did not convey all 5 of those items. Clever buyer's realtor, clever buyer's attorney stepped in and said, we didn't receive all 5. And they canceled the contract a couple days before the closing. Wow. If they don't receive all 5 of those things, the buyer tells the seller, I didn't get them, and then they can extend the contract closing to get those things in hand, and then they'll still cancel if they don't like it. So the moral of the story for buyer's agents and seller's agents, unfortunately, not every agent's going to be as sharp as you. And so whether you're representing the buyer side or the seller side, you have to know the rules on both sides, and you have to do both jobs. The goal of these shows is to educate everybody so we're operating at a higher level. But the reality is you're going to be babysitting the other side frequently. And if you're babysitting the other side, you got to know what the other side's supposed to be delivering. You got to know what you're supposed to be receiving so your client doesn't get upset at you. And if you're not getting or receiving, if you're not delivering or receiving all 5 of those items, you're leaving your client exposed to either getting canceled at the last minute or either side that you're on. The buyer can cancel at the last minute. And so it's, stuff happens, as we all know. Spouses don't get along. They get along great at the start of the contract, and then the pressures of life get to them. By the end of the contract, everybody's looking for an out sometimes, and they're looking for any way to escape closing. And buyers go to clever buyers attorneys. And when clients come to me and they say, we want to get out of closing, one of the first things I ask them is, if it's a condominium, did you get all your condominium docs? And the frequently asked questions and answers is actually a statutory document required by Florida law. So any condominium association that says they don't have it, there's actually a statute that says they have to generate it and maintain it. And I've had that after we've done these Zoom meetings. I've had agents come back to me and say, hey, my condo says they don't have it. So the reality is they have to have it. If they don't have it, they're not meeting the statutory regulations. And there's ways around that as well. And we had one transaction where the association was never going to conform. They were never going to cough up the frequently asked questions and answers. They just weren't going to do it. And so the agent said, what do I do? And I said, you just be transparent. Be transparent. I said, tell your seller that you can't get it. If the seller doesn't want to hire an attorney and hammer the seller side, hammer the association and say, you got to do this by law. It was never going to happen by closing anyways. You just be transparent. You tell your seller and you say, what do you want to do? The law requires you disclose it. You don't have it. And if the seller says, well, we should tell the other side, then you tell the other side. And if the seller says, we'll just keep this between us, you keep it between us. And that's the best way to work it, because at the end of the day, if things boomerang, you don't want to be accused by your client of withholding knowledge that was germane to the deal. You don't want to be accused in that transaction by your seller of having knowledge that you didn't disclose to your seller that resulted in the buyer canceling. If you tell the seller the association is being difficult and they're not producing the FAQs, the seller can't come back to you and say, you didn't shore up this deal early on. And it's uncomfortable for agents to do that stuff, but I always say the devil you know early is the best way to proceed, and make your seller aware of that devil, and they'll buy in. And you're going to earn their loyalty and their trust throughout the transaction by being transparent like that. And it's a simple rule, and we can all live with it. And if we all know what it is, we're not going to be surprised by it. All right. So those are my 3 hacks. I have a bonus topic.
That's awesome, Jim. Let's just go through real quick, on the 3. So number 1, on that walkthrough, if there does an issue comes up that the seller has to escrow 125%, right? I advise too, is what I do, especially if I'm selling condos that are furnished, I video everything to make sure it's there, right? That comes up. Number 2 was definitely don't convey the loan approval letter if you're representing the buyer. You just have to do an email. And then number 3 is obviously the ones we just covered, the 5, points that you need to get from the condominium. I think so. Those are 3 amazing hacks that add a lot of value.
And then the bonus hack is, it's a foolish detail. Everybody overlooks it. Put the addresses in the address line. And the reason I'm going to tell you that that's so important is, if things go sideways and you represent the seller and you're sending notices to the buyer and you don't have an address in here, And the buyer comes back 3 weeks after closing and says they didn't get their notices. These are real facts from the other day. Now, we weren't the closing agent on this, but nobody was watching the ball. And the buyer says, well, we didn't get any notices. The seller says, well, this is where the seller's agent says, well, this is where we've always communicated with you at. And it was an irrelevant address. It was a friend's address or something, but no one can pin down what the legal notice address was. If you take the extra 2 minutes to put the buyer's address in there and the seller's address in there, and things go sideways, you will terminate that deal surely and quickly and without, any kind of arguments from either side. If you don't have addresses in there, your transaction can drag on forever. And so you represent the seller and you want to send your notice of cancellation and you send it to the address you've always communicated at, but this section is blank. Your buyer might come back to you and say, we never got it and we don't live there, and that was my best friend's address and we haven't been there but for a few minutes when we were communicating early in the transaction, and guess what, the cancellation wasn't conveyed, and now you've already got a new buyer for the contract. You're the seller's agent, now you have a conflict of contracts, and that stuff happens. And there's another rule that is, and this will be a double bonus, is you can relist a property where you've sent the cancellation and you haven't received a cancellation from a buyer. We'll go into the certain set of facts that control that set. We'll go into the rules that control that set of facts. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you have the buyer's address and you send the cancellation, you've done your job. They don't have to sign it. You've given notice. And so without that address, you could be shooting pool with a rope and not getting to your goal. All right. I am going to turn off them. And that's something I see everybody screw up. I hate to say frequently, but I see it screwed up a lot, and it causes a lot of problems. All right. A couple things real quick. If you guys don't have Title Leap accounts, set up a Title Leap account. That's the message that the tool that's going to save you a ton of time. If you're not using Title Advance, right? So you're going to a listing appointment and you want to walk in as the best prepared agent, and the seller's interviewing 4 or 5 realtors or 2 or 3 realtors. You walk in with a Title Advance, you're going to distinguish yourself. You're going to tell the seller what they have for title issues instead of you going in there and asking them what they have for title issues, and you're going to get that listing. Text me 24/7 if you have contract issues. If you want a Title Advance, you can find my mobile number at newpathtitle.com. And so you can text me the address of the property, tell me you need a Title Advance, I'll send it off to you. And that'll be your best tool to get that listing. And it'll also, as a huge bonus, it'll tell you what's on that property that has to be paid off at closing. So things like Y-Green loans and PACE loans and all those little things that sellers forget about that are mortgages, even second mortgages, sometimes they say, no, it's a HELOC. That's a mortgage. And so when you as deals potentially get skinnier and skinnier, those little edges are going to be your tools to save calories, to save time, to save your personal resources. So you're not, working on something that can't close. And then at the end of the deal, they're coming back to you. So get your Title Advances, make sure you're showing up for closing fully prepared. And let's see, what else did we have? Ryan, Real Trade.
Yeah. This is great. I mean, I'm here too to add value to the agents. Nice thing too is you can sign up on Real Trade. It's free as well. And the nice thing is there's thousands of buyers and sellers on there, okay, that can connect with you. The nice thing is you make a profile on the platform, just like LinkedIn. We actually import your listings for you and you own them. So you're the actual point of contact for buyers and sellers if they have a question on your property. And it blows your mind, a lot different than Zillow or other platforms. And another thing too is we have a social aspect to the platform where you can network with other agents. Also, buyers and sellers can discover you. But the big thing is you can network with service providers like Jim on the platform and actually communicate with them and share information. So we have a lot of lenders, title companies, contractors, inspectors that are on the platform that you can connect with as well. So not only can you find buyers and sellers, but it can actually help you do business. Best thing, it's free for agents.
And the big thing that I like about Real Trade is it's the shortest route to a double dip.
Mm-hmm.
You get buyers that are looking for properties on Real Trade, and unlike any other platform on the planet, they can contact the seller's agent directly. And the buyer's seller's agent is the best shot at the double dip. It's also a great tool for buyers to find off-market properties. So you have sellers that know people that haven't listed yet, and you have buyers that are looking for properties that aren't listed, and you go on Real Trade and you advertise what your buyer is looking for, and you're going to get sellers that are going to be able to go over and poke their you're going to get sellers agents who will be able to go over and poke their seller who's not listed and say, hey, I've got an exact buyer for your property. Let's go after this guy. So it's a great tool at no cost to agents that allows you to reach agents that don't have listed properties.
Yeah, we could do a whole video on that too, but let's definitely, we have some questions here. We're winding down here in just a few minutes here. Let's go over, we had one from LNA. How does escrow get dispersed if the buyer breaches the contract and is already past the inspection period?
Oh, I love that question. All right. There's two conditions that are necessary to break escrow. A good escrow agent can only break escrow if in one of two fact patterns. The first fact pattern is the parties agree. What does an agreement look like? An agreement looks like a signed cancellation, but an agreement also looks like a settlement statement, right? So a written agreement by the parties, the escrow can break. Cancellation that's signed by both parties. If it's only signed by one party, the seller might be relisting, but they're not going to be breaking escrow. The other condition, escrow can be broken under a court order. So you can only break escrow if you've got a judge's order or an agreement of the parties. Agreement of the parties can look like something friendly or not friendly. It's either a settlement statement or a cancellation. It can also be an exchange of emails. The seller can say, we want all the money, and the buyer can respond, the seller gets all the money. Not the best way to do it, but if you've got hostile parties and you've got an exchange of emails, and that's another really good point, Ryan, is people think that an agreement has to be reduced to a one-page statement where it's signed by both parties.
Yeah.
There are a number of rules that we can go into that allow a contract to happen over a series of communications. So you have the emails. You need four things for a contract: place, parties, price, and time, right? Place, parties, price, and time. You get an exchange of emails that's 10 emails long, and you establish all those terms, and you have a contract. You have an enforceable contract.
Love that. Yeah, no, emails can do it. Okay, let's get through them because we just have a few minutes here left. Does the seller or seller's agent have, this is from Chris Hosted, does the seller or seller's agent have the right to command a copy of loan commitment? So we talked about that you can just send an email saying, hey, we got the loan commitment. Do they if the seller's agent asks, do you have to provide that?
Yep. So the new FAR bar says that the most recent version has some modifications to the financing provision. Under the new FAR bar, the buyer and the loan officer and the title agent actually can cooperate with the seller's agent directly by written request of the seller's agent. So in the contract, it says that all those parties can respond directly to seller and seller's agents upon written request, unlike the old contract. So the seller's agent can actually contact the loan officer directly and say, hey, what's the status of the loan? Did you get all the employment information in a timely manner? Have they been getting back to you in a timely manner? And there's another important provision in the contract that says that the buyer has to use diligent good faith and effort. And so if the buyer is dragging their feet at every juncture, and then they want to cancel the contract because they didn't get loan approval, guess what? That's a default. The default wasn't that they didn't get the loan approval. The default was that the buyer didn't do all those things they were supposed to do. And that's another topic for another title talk, is when you don't get your loan, does the buyer always get their money back? And the answer is no. They had to do all those little prerequisite things along the way. So if there's $100 grand in escrow and the buyer wasn't using good faith to go after their loan, and they say, we didn't get our loan, we want our money back, the loan wasn't approved, the seller can say, you don't get your money back. And guess what? The money sits in escrow until one of two things happen: signed cancellation or a judge's order.
Yep. Hopefully don't have to go through the judge's order. That can be costly in time. So, okay. And then we had one from James Anelone. Does the governance form also need to be included in those 5 items that have to be shared? Does the governance form for the HOA, for the condo?
Not sure what the governance form is, but I think that would be the condominium declaration of covenants and restrictions, the decks. So yeah, it's a huge document. You're just going to send a link. You're not going to send a hard copy.
Mm-hmm. James says line 10
10
on the condo rider.
Let me look at line 10 of the condo rider.
Line 10, section 10.
Log in.
No, just section, he says. He said he was sorry, just the section.
It's okay. Section 4, 10, governance forms. Pursuant to Chapter 17, buyers entitled to receive from seller a copy of the governance forms, the form provided by the division. Yeah, that's the declaration of covenants and restrictions. That is the governance form. Yep. All right. Anything else? James Madelon?
No, I think that's about it.
All right, you guys. It was a pleasure. We also do at New Path Title, we also do crypto trades. I know crypto is the hot commodity. If you get a buyer, you get a seller that says either want to get their money in crypto or they want to pay for their property in crypto, we can do those deals. And if you go to the top of newpathtitle.com, there's a closing cost calculator that you can use, and it'll give you your closing costs. And between title advance and the closing cost calculator, that's going to be your best tool to go into your listing appointment. All right.
Awesome, Jim. Thanks everybody for attending. Hope you got some valuable information, and we will continue the conversation and hope to see you guys on Real Trade and also see a title.
We'll do 3 more of these things, and what next 2 Tuesdays from now.
Awesome.
Second Tuesday from now. All right. See you guys.
Great. Thank
Thanks.
you.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you.